Okay, today I'm making a cheesecake. I'm going to actually make a chocolate cheesecake. First thing you need is for the crust, you need some graham cracker crumbs. You can buy the pre-done graham cracker crumbs, or do what I usually do is I buy a box of graham crackers and break some up, put them in a bag and crunch them up with my rolling pin until they're good and fine. And you're going to want about a cup of graham cracker crumbs. You're going to notice I've got a little more stuff than what normal because I'm making a little bigger cheesecake. This will normally make a 9-inch cheesecake in the round springform pans, but I'm going to make mine in a 9 by 13, so I've increased everything just a little bit slightly as far as the crust goes. I'm not going to alter the filling ingredients because that'll be enough, but for the crust ingredients I'm increasing it just slightly so it'll be a little bit thicker. So there's a cup of graham cracker crumbs, 3 tablespoons of sugar, and 3 tablespoons of melted butter, and we're gonna mix that around. I've got the oven preheating to 325. I've got my 9 by 13 pan lightly greased, or lightly buttered I should say. You want to use butter. And we'll mix this together and then we'll spread it out in the bottom of my 9 by 13 pan. Now you're going to mix it all together. It'll kind of look like wet sand. You just want to make sure it's blended well. Get all that melted butter and sugar mixed into it. And you'll notice that if you take it, it'll kind of stick together a little bit. Not terribly, but that's what you want. As I said, you've got your lightly buttered just on the bottom of your pan, whether it be your 9-inch springform or the 9 by 13. And then you just want to spread this out as evenly as you can, and we'll press it down to form the crust. Try and get into the corners and make an even layer. And then just go through and press it down. Okay, and you're going to bake this in the preheated 325 degree oven for 10 minutes. And while that's baking, we'll get started on our filling. Now while the crust is baking, we're going to do the filling. It's you start with 5 8-ounce packages of cream cheese. You want them to be room temperature, and that is correct. 5 packages. It's a lot of cream cheese, but this makes an awesome cheesecake. So just kind of scrape them all off and throw them into the bowl. Now you really want to make sure that your cream cheese is room temperature. If it's not, it won't beat up smooth and you'll have lumpy cheesecake. It won't be the end of the world, but you want it to be nice and smooth. You also don't want to use non-fat cream cheese for this. It just won't turn out. And I don't believe in using the reduced fat. My opinion is if you're going to eat cheesecake, do the whole thing or don't bother. So now we've got the 5 packages of cream cheese in there, a cup of sugar. We're going to add 3 tablespoons of flour and a tablespoon of vanilla, and then we'll beat that together. And this is my homemade vanilla, and no, I don't measure it. I just kind of teaspoon, teaspoon, tablespoon. Close enough. So as I said, we'll get this on the mixer and we'll beat this all together. And just start it out on low till you start to get it mixed together, and then you can turn it up and whip it together a little bit. And you want to stop every once in a while and scrape your sides down Make sure you got everything off the bottom. Which you'll see already, it's looking nice and smooth. And you don't want to overbeat your cheesecake, get a lot of air in it, because then you'll have bubbles and it'll deflate. But we're gonna, it only needs to be beaten for about a minute or so. And this is what your crust will look like when it comes out. It's just lightly browned. You don't want it too over brown because we're gonna put in the stuff on top and bake it some more. So just set this aside while you're finishing up your filling at 325. So once you got your filling all beaten up nice and smoothly, we're going to add in a cup of sour cream. We'll beat that in and get that all mixed in good, and then we'll slowly add 4 eggs, one at a time. You don't want to overbeat at this point. Once you start adding the eggs, you want to just mix until it's mixed in, and that's it. We'll mix in the cream cheese. Now the sour cream is all beat in, nicely mixed. We'll start adding our eggs one at a time. So we'll just put 1 egg in, beat it on low, and when that is mixed in, we'll add another. And that's pretty much mixed in, so we'll add number 2. And just continue like that until all 4 of them are mixed in. Now if you were making a vanilla cheesecake, you would stop here and pour this over the crust and bake it. But because we're making a chocolate cheesecake, I'm going to add some cocoa powder. And I'm going to sift because my cocoa powder tends to be a little bit lumpy, and I need to move my beater here. I think that's as far over as it's going to get. So we're going to sift in a heaping 1/4 cup of a good cocoa powder. Not that cheap Hershey's crap. And we'll slowly mix in the cocoa. And you want to go just again until it's just mixed.
You could even do marbles, couldn't you?
You could. If you wanted to go to that kind of a bother, yes. Do half and half and put the vanilla in and drop the chocolate over the top and just kind of swirl it in. And always stop and scrape down. And we'll finish mixing it once I get it off the beater here. So once you have it off the mixer, you want to really stir it well and get everything off the bottom and the sides to make sure everything is mixed well. And then you're going to pour it into your pan. And just spread it as evenly as you can. Okay, we'll just smooth it out. So if you're baking it in the 9 or 10 inch springform pan, it's going to bake for 55 minutes to an hour. In this, we'll check it in 30 minutes because it'll take between 30 and 40 minutes in the 9 by 13. And it's still going to jiggle just slightly in the center. You don't want to overbake it because then they'll crack. I mean, sometimes they'll crack anyway, but it's going to be just jiggle slightly in the center, and it'll finish when you take it out of the oven. It'll finish setting up. Okay, so this is 30 minutes, and it's still just a little. You want a little jiggle, but that's way too much. So we'll set it. Probably going to check it again in about 6 minutes. It's still just a little too. We'll give it, let's say 4 minutes. We'll check it. Oh yeah. See, that's got just a little bit of a jiggle left to it. That's fine. And it's starting to crack around the edges, so if I bake it any longer, it'll just crack all over the place. So we'll set it aside to cool, and it needs to be refrigerated at least 3 to 4 hours, preferably overnight. This is not a quick dessert. It's something you want to make ahead of time, because it's always better once it sits overnight, but at least 3 to 4 hours in the fridge. So it's going to cool. It'll be dessert for Christmas. And as you see, as the berries thaw, they'll create their own juice. And I turned the heat up just a little bit now. You want to bring it up to a simmer. The raspberries have mostly disintegrated, but what I'll do is, once I start to thicken it, I think I'll throw a few more raspberries in so they don't have as much long to cook. So we'll have a few more whole raspberries. Since I had used whole strawberries, as they've thawed, I've taken the spoon and just kind of mushed them a little bit. So they're not whole, but they're in chunks, and that'll be good. So what we'll do is we'll make a slurry with a little bit of water and probably three or four teaspoons of cornstarch. That should be enough, and then we'll add that once we get it up to a simmer and let it start to cook. So it's just about coming up to a simmer, and as soon as it does, I've got like almost 4 tablespoons of cornstarch dissolved in 3 to 4 tablespoons of water. You just want enough to dissolve it. We'll stir that in and let it start to thicken. It'll take a couple minutes to thicken, and as you can, hopefully you can see, it's around the edges. It's just starting to simmer. So we'll be adding that cornstarch in and it's simmering. We're going to stir in the cornstarch. You can use a flour mixture if you want to. That tends to lump up a bit more. The cornstarch tends to be a little smoother, and you'll see it instantly starts to thicken a little bit. You don't need this totally thick, but we'll let it cook for a minute just till it thickens. Get the end of the cornstarch in there. And it will thicken more as it sits, so that's why you don't want to get it too thick. And it's back to a boil, so we're going to turn it up. And as you see, as the berries thaw, they'll create their own juice. And I turned the heat up just a little bit now. You want to bring it up to a simmer. The raspberries have mostly disintegrated, but what I'll do is, once I start to thicken it, I think I'll throw a few more raspberries in so they don't have as much long to cook. So we'll have a few more whole raspberries. Since I had used whole strawberries, as they've thawed, I've taken the spoon and just kind of mushed them a little bit. So they're not whole, but they're in chunks, and that'll be good. So what we'll do is we'll make a slurry with a little bit of water and probably three or four teaspoons of cornstarch. That should be enough, and then we'll add that once we get it up to a simmer and let it start to cook. So it's just about coming up to a simmer, and as soon as it does, I've got like almost 4 tablespoons of cornstarch dissolved in 3 to 4 tablespoons of water. You just want enough to dissolve it. We'll stir that in and let it start to thicken. It'll take a couple minutes to thicken, and as you can, hopefully you can see, it's around the edges. It's just starting to simmer. So we'll be adding that cornstarch in and it's simmering. We're going to stir in the cornstarch. You can use a flour mixture if you want to. That tends to lump up a bit more. The cornstarch tends to be a little smoother. And you'll see it instantly starts to thicken a little bit. You don't need this totally thick, but we'll let it cook for a minute. Just till it thickens. Get the end of the cornstarch in there. And it will thicken more as it sits, so that's why you don't want to get it too thick. And it's back to a boil, so we're going to turn it off. I'm going to throw a few more whole raspberries in there that aren't totally mushed down, and we'll let it sit till it cools. It'll be ready to go. I'm just going to add a few more raspberries in just to have the whole effect in there. They're frozen, but they'll thaw quickly in that boiling liquid. And we'll just let that sit.
20-pound Christmas ham. Oh yeah.
Now this is the cheesecake after it has cooled all night. It left it in the fridge. It did crack a little bit, but cheesecakes normally do that. So, see if I can get a piece out of here. First one is always the hardest to get out. Look out. Now here's the berries that we cooked up. It does thicken some. It doesn't get totally thick, but and if you want yours a little thicker, you can always add a little more cornstarch to it. Also, when you're cooking those down, you want to taste your berries. If they're not sweet enough, you can add a ½ cup of sugar when you're cooking the berries. And if they're really tart, you can add more, but those were sweet enough that I really didn't need to add anything. And there's your chocolate cheesecake with berries.
Very good.